All right. Hey, good evening. And we are live here for another episode of Friday Night Fire with myself, Mike Phillips, and my good friend on my left, your right. This is Mr. Matt Koenig. And we're going to be rocking some Friday Night Fire. We're talking about sex and the Bible. And hopefully, if you are watching us live, we're live on your favorite social media platforms. You can check us out on YouTube and anywhere else. We also are broadcasting on the Clubhouse. And Clubhouse, yeah, we may hang out and have some conversation. You distracted me, bro. Hey, so what we do on Friday Night Fire is we go live, and it's all about motivation, inspiration, faith-based foundation, and conversation with my good friend Matt and I. So, getting into this week's topic, I'm getting a little bit of feedback, Matt, on your end.
Of course, because it's because the iPhone, you can't really shut the sound off.
You turn it way down?
I just moved it way across the room to hopefully not get you feedback from Clubhouse, but
it's good, dude. Right, just like that, we're good. Okay. So if you guys are watching the video version, one of the things that came up last week is it turned out I did not do a mic check, and so while we were on here, and I was venting really good about last week's show.
And by really good, he means a lot.
I was venting a lot. And the nice thing is when we got into the conversation, Matt is a really good listener. And so he and I were connected and he could hear me fine. And then when I tuned back in to cut the podcast version, half of it was missing. And it was the angry half. So we just scrapped it and we're live on this week. So
I love it, dude.
So this week's conversation on both YouTube, and we'd love for you to join us on any of the video platforms and comment. We on Clubhouse, it's just Matt and I up here on stage because there's not a way for us to cross broadcast. But what we get into, what we're getting into this week is sex and the Bible, right? The birds and the bees. And just so to kind of frame this for everybody, so you're aware, Matt and I don't have a lot of conversation on these. Both of us are very rooted in our faith. We're both very confident in our faith and where we are at. And we get together and we have a very real, raw, and organic dialogue. So this is not something that we've talked about ahead of time, which can sometimes lead to a lot of fun. So, Matt, I'm going to let you lead it off. So because this is something, just so you all know, for the folks that are watching, this is something Matt's brought up and wanted to talk about, like, I don't know, 6 months ago when we first started the podcast?
I not want to? Yeah, but I love that I brought this up to you and I was like, or we could talk about tithing, and you were like, yeah, let's definitely talk about sex then. So definitely, just so you know, I'm all about us talking about tithing next week because of how quickly you were like, yeah, hey, you know what? Let's instead talk about sex. But because you've avoided this one for a hot minute.
Well, I avoided it because it's an uncomfortable topic, and plus we didn't know exactly where we were headed with this podcast, and we've really started to take a deeper dive on faith, and I think at this point it's something that's more comfortable for two white Christian men to talk about sex. Why wouldn't it be? Right?
Right? Why wouldn't that be awkward for us to just have this dialogue with strangers?
The salt and pepper of the biblical realm, right here.
Shoop. Oh, wait, that's the other song by them. You know, here's the thing, Mike. Here's why. So there is a reason why this has been on my heart a lot. Dara and I, as you know, have created a couple's devotional around the topic of loving like Jesus, right? The couple's journey. And sex is an uncomfortable thing for people to talk about. I was having lunch with my buddy Scott today, and it's funny because I brought up how back at my old church, Threads, in Kalamazoo, it seemed like anytime sex or money were talked about, Lee, the pastor at that time, who was a really good friend of mine, conveniently would be on vacation. And then I would be giving the message, right? And it kind of somehow became a thing that I was known for being comfortable talking about. And I think part of the reason I was comfortable is because I came from a life that had a very distorted, perverted view of sex. In watching growing up and seeing my dad and the relationships he had. So there were things that I knew weren't appropriate, but they didn't put me off kilter to a point of discomfort. So
Sure.
getting to know God and seeing that aspect of a relationship as like, the first gift God gives Adam is a perfect companion, and then the first gift he gives them together is sex. And I'm like, man, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be this weird, dirty thing that's not supposed to happen. Like, oh, I thought sex was you come home after school and your dad's hooking up with some random on the couch in the living room, forgetting he has a bedroom. Like, my view of sex was very, like, perverted like that. And I kid you not, my 13th birthday...
you've told me this.
Yeah, at my 13th birthday, my dad and a group of his buddies, right, they have booze for me and my friends and a prostitute. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the whole prostitute angle. But so for me, sex was something that I was very much introduced to at an age way before I should have been, to be fair.
Sure.
So once I started to view... once I realized I wasn't uncomfortable with it, then now as a believer and someone as a leader in the faith community, I'm saying how can Dara and I looked and said, how can we help people have a healthier view on relationships? And part of that is, how can we help people get a healthier view of sex and the gift that it is and the blessing that it is? And how can we make this a conversation that isn't uncomfortable for people? I mean, God, literally in the second book, right in the beginning of the story here, God's not afraid to talk about it.
Right.
And Paul isn't afraid to wrestle with it. So why are we so uncomfortable with it?
Well, I think that this is just one guy's opinion, but you went back to your teenage years. I think a lot of times, especially young men, our primary influence is other young men. Like, we have bad examples of the men in our lives for what is a healthy sexual relationship, for what is a healthy relationship as a married person, for what is, a lot of those pieces that get put together, they get put together by other 12, 13, 14-year-old boys that they don't know what the heck they're talking about. And we're certainly, at that time in our lives, we're certainly not turning to the Bible to be like, well, hey, where's the sexual instruction manual, right? I needed to look this up.
So true.
And so then what happens, fast forward, once you maybe get to, at least for me, once you get to that point where you realize in a church setting, in a religious setting, that then maybe the pastor is talking about sex and what's right and wrong in a sexual relationship. Almost always, most Christians, when they think about the Bible and they talk about sex, they think of the don'ts. Don't do this. Don't do that. Yes. Do not. You shouldn't, right? Because the Bible prohibits certain actions. And, but that is what becomes the focus. It doesn't become the focus of the other, and it's probably 75, 80% is the don'ts. Maybe 20% is like, oh yeah, and in the beginning, and like you said, he has them lay together, but
one flesh.
Yeah, two become one flesh. But outside of that, all of the other things that they're talking about, and here's the worst part. I was raised in an Episcopalian church where they are, it's like Catholic Light. And so what happens, if anyone doesn't know, that's what it's like. You're raised Episcopalian and you participate in some of those same things. And I remember I was probably like 10, 11, 12. Okay. And they're talking about adultery and how terrible adultery is, right? They focus on this, and you're going through Exodus or Acts and so forth, and those specific ones that talk about immorality and fornication, and they're talking about all these bad things. Meanwhile, the priest in the church is having an affair with the organist.
Oh, dude.
Well, and it's like, so you get this twisted message,
right?
Yeah, right.
So, but here's the challenge with that, Mike. So, because I love that what you just shared, though. Like, when we think, why is intimacy? And by the way, I sent you something in the chat. And for those that are listening in Clubhouse, if you want to download 100% free the couples devotional to go through, you can go to and these are numbers 633.today/couples devo. So for those of you on Clubhouse, 633.today/couples devo.
Right there.
You can download it 100% free. I was just saying it out loud for the people in listening on Clubhouse. 100% free to you. It's our gift to you. We think it'll really be a blessing to your relationships. But so you just touched on something, though, why intimacy is such an awkward discussion in the church. And I think it's because when we talk about intimacy, when we say the word intimacy, we're thinking that means I have to share what's going on in the bedroom. And that's something that's private and protected and isn't a dialogue for everybody else. But in the church, I think it's gotten a little misconstrued that if we're going to talk about sex at all, it means we're crossing a line because we're talking about intimate moments with our spouse. And the reality is, we should respect and love our spouse enough that we're not going to share those. It's not appropriate to share those, like the intimate things that are going on in your bedroom. But the Bible is very clear about the importance of intimacy in a relationship, and I think the fact that we're so afraid to talk about it speaks to the damage done in our lives because of this topic, like what you just shared at the Episcopalian Church. And by the way, real quick shout out though, this stream that we're doing is made possible by StreamYard. If you guys don't know, and Michael shared the link, but you guys got to hit join-streamyard.com. Phenomenal platform for live streaming on multiple platforms. The gang at StreamYard is so amazing. If you have not checked their tool out and you're live streaming, you are live streaming wrong. So go to join-streamyard.com and
That's
hook
strong.
up. Listen, man, I'm not afraid to say what it is, and what it is if you're using something else, you're doing something dumb. So get on StreamYard. Okay, but let's go back to this. So we're uncomfortable, and it's
Matt got the plug in tonight. That's normally my jam.
I know it is, but because we dove right into this fun topic, like that's why I also know you were uncomfortable, because you like forgot all the script that you do at the beginning with faith-based motivation, inspiration, and faith-based conversation. I get to do Mike's part tonight. And join StreamYard. Okay.
Salt and pepper was going through my head. It was like, let's talk about sex, baby. I'm sure we're going to,
And
hashtag not sponsored.
So here's the challenge. The view we get of sex comes from television, comes from movies, and comes from the dialogue, like you said, that we have with our friends in middle school, right? When we know nothing. We get home ec class that shows us how to put a condom on a banana. And then we have the pastor at the Lutheran church telling us that sex is for procreation purposes, right? We have churches just that never teach on it, never talk about it, small groups that are too uncomfortable to talk about it. And the reality is we've got a bunch of Christians, bunch of Christ followers, bunch of folks that many of them didn't get married as a virgin, right? They've had these other life experiences, and now they become a believer, and what they bring into a relationship is the sexual experience and knowledge that they grew up in, or that they've experienced with an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend that wasn't healthy, obviously, because they're not with them. Right. And it's like, if we just dumb it all down and go, well, if you ask 9 out of 10 people, where did you actually learn about sex? 9 out of 10 are not going to say, I had this great mentor in the church who took the time to explain to me the value of this relationship and what a gift that this physical intimacy is, and how that's like a place to go back to when you're struggling in your relationship. Go back to the first gift God gave you when you're struggling and you're out of money, when you're going to lose your home, when you lost your job, all the things that money can buy you that help you feel secure in your relationship. But there's this beautiful gift God gave you that doesn't cost a thing, that we can always go back to with our spouse. And nobody even talks about it because they're like, well, I don't want people to picture me and my wife doing it. Well, then don't talk about what you and your wife are doing, goofball.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be awkward, but we make it awkward because we bring in the tainted view we have. And on some level, that tainted view is still part of our conversation inside. So when we're talking about it, we're thinking about the view that we bring into it. And I think that sometimes makes it a challenging discussion. It's awkward.
Well, I think that...
What's up, Bridge Services? Good to see you.
What's up? What's up, Bridge Services? And Jim, again, if you got some friends on Clubhouse, man, hit that plus button and invite them. We appreciate you coming in and tuning in and listening in on us or with us.
We can do that. I'm going to just do that.
We should. I should hit the plus button too.
You should.
Oh, I'm adding Neil. Maybe Neil will show up for this one. That would be fun, huh?
Let's see.
Tina just stopped by. Jared, Tina, nice to see you guys on Clubhouse.
I just plussed them. I just hit them all.
So, go. I'm gonna backtrack for just a second because one of the things we talked about just a few minutes ago, and
I think awkwardness of sex.
Well, it's the awkwardness because Christian church is often talking about the don'ts, right? And it seems like the don'ts outweigh the do's, and it's like because all this stuff is in the Bible about adultery and incest and bestiality, right? And there's all this stuff.
For some reason, they instantly tie sex to all the bad things,
right? And so there's this stigma in our society associated with sex that is certainly not a biblical view. But then when it comes to talking about sex, and we come to this place of talking about it, and there is mention of it multiple places in the Bible, when we get into that point, then it's like, okay, well, God, there must be something wrong. And so we start looking for the stuff, right? One of the 7 deadly sins, lust. We were actually, I was having a conversation with someone today about this, and the conversation that was brought up, he says, well, I think his words were something along the lines of, well, wouldn't God want prostitutes to be able to make a living? And I'm like, well, there's other skill sets, but for one, I said that falls directly under. He says so, and he asked me directly because he knew we were having this conversation tonight. Okay. Well, do you think it's wrong? I said, well, I think it falls under lust for one, and then I think there's several places in the Bible that specifically say that prostitution, because one of the things, and you brought up, I think it was Paul in the Bible, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but where they're talking about like when two become one flesh, that is a physical give and take, it's really including with a prostitute.
Well, so no, I'm going to push back on that. Here's what I'm going to say. In Genesis, it wasn't, because there wasn't prostitutes, right? And so when Paul's talking about it, he's actually quoting Genesis 2. And I think this is the part, though, that's the challenge. And here's where part of our broken view of sex comes in, okay? Is that, and I for years ignored this too, right? Because people say, well, human beings weren't meant to be monogamous. And there was a point in my life where I said the same thing. And I'm going to just say that was stupid. Of me. But here's why I think this is so important, right? Because sex is very powerful, and we'll talk about it in Corinthians and Ephesians, and we'll dig in a little deeper there. But I want to go back to the beginning of sex in the Bible, which is Genesis 2. Okay. Genesis 2, and I'm gonna read it out of your favorite version, the NLT, and then
New Living Translation,
and then maybe I'll read it out of the Message because I probably like it better. But in verse 20, Genesis 2, verse 23, it says, "At last the man exclaimed, this one is bone for my bone, flesh for my flesh. She'll be called woman because she was taken from man." Right? Boom. Adam sees her and goes, "Wow." Right? Like if we were to take his whole statement and sum it up in a word, he says, "Wow." Right? Because finally he is.
Guys still do that, by the way.
Oh, dude, I do every day when I see my wife. When I wake up, I'm like, wow, right? Like I leveled up, outkicked my coverage by a lot. So he sees Eve, and the first thing that happens is he is blown away by this woman, right? Now, maybe it's because all he's seen are donkeys, antelope, and fish, and this is the first time he's seen another person. But here's the reality, is that this other person was perfectly created for him, right? But it's more than just the fact that she's a person. It's his person, right? So there is something fundamentally here that we see at the beginning, which is, here's what a relationship that's supposed to be looks like. Because some people are like, well, getting married is for the thing, just because it's obedience, and you don't have to emotionally care, and you don't have to emotionally, maybe you don't have to be attracted, but it's like this duty. It's such a horrible thing, the way that we describe marriage. And in the beginning of the story, the first thing God shows us is Adam's reaction to the woman that's about to become his wife, and he is blown away, right? So he's emotionally engaged. His soul is engaged. He sees eternity with this woman right in front of him. And then it says, and this is how we know that, it says, this explains, and this is important, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. There's the marriage part, right? There's the as a couple.
What are you at, 224?
224. It says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and it says, and the two are united into one. But the original, it's like they're united as one flesh.
One flesh.
So meaning, the attraction is going to make you want to lay down, right? But the Bible then does say, now the man and his wife were both naked, they felt no shame. So I think the part of the brokenness of sex is that when we go into it, We're not going into it looking at that other person and going, wow, this is my forever companion. We're going, she's hot, or ladies are going, he's hot, or whatever. And it's like, I bet they're fun. And that mentality is, this is going to be cool for a minute. And there's no consequence, we think, because we think when it's done, it's done. But Adam was looking at her as, this is my perfect companion. There was no thought of maybe somebody else comes along later. There was no thought of, well, if she's not perfect, maybe she's at least fun. Maybe she's not Mrs. Right, but she's Mrs. Right now. Those things didn't exist. This was him meeting the first female, right? And she was his companion, and what he saw was, here's my other half forever. And part of our brokenness in sex is we don't enter into sex with that mindset because we're leading with the sex instead of looking for the companion that God has for us.
No, I absolutely agree with you. Fast forward, like when we were talking about and the two become one, fast forward to 1 Corinthians 6, verse 4. I got to look it up here. I got notes on my screen. For those of you guys just tuning in and listening, Mike P needs notes. Big time on this stuff. Matt's like a biblical genius.
Are you
Mike
talking about 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1, to be married or to be single, that stuff?
Nope. 1 Corinthians 6,
that's
it's 15. Where 13 says, food was made for the stomach for food. True that someday God will do away with both of them, but you can't say our bodies were made for sexual immorality. Fast forward, 1 Corinthians 6:15 says, don't you realize that your bodies are actually a part of Christ? Should a man take his body, which is part of Christ, and join it to a prostitute? Never. And don't realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her. That was what I was saying a minute ago. So when Paul's talking about this, for the scriptures say the two are united into one. So like you're bringing up, like we, especially in our younger years, everybody looked and said, well, yeah, she seems fun. He seems fun. Let's figure that out. Hey, I gotta and one of the things that society teaches us is, well, you gotta figure out what you like.
Well, exactly. And here's the wrongness of it. Well, no. Let's talk about the rightness. Here's the rightness of that. You do have to figure out what you like. But let me explain something that a lot gets missed. So you just point out 1 Corinthians 6, where Paul talks about the don'ts with sex. And then I'm going to dig in a little bit. Let's see. I want to say, is it 1 Corinthians 7, maybe? See,
what up, Joe Ingram on Clubhouse?
Yeah, I invited him.
I love Joe.
So he talks about should people get married in 1 Corinthians 7, and he talks about the power of sexual desire in there, right? So he says, like he says in 1 Corinthians 7, I'm going to read out the Message because I like this. So verse 1 says,
if you guys are just tuning in, hold that thought, Matt. If you guys are just tuning in, we don't have a love for one version, just so you know. Like I like the NLT version, Matt likes the Message version, but we will go through different, and it's not, just to be clear, it is not to change the context or message of what's read in the Bible, but so that we can better connect with you as our audience.
And for the sake of getting it accurate.
Yeah.
Like I spent
so we can have
lunch in
some
the
discussion.
King James version with the Strong's Concordance today.
Got it.
Wrestling with tongues with one of my buddies. Because
just
of our
framing
podcast.
it a little bit.
Because of our podcast, by the way, on tongues.
Okay.
So in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is writing a letter to the Corinthians. And so he's answering a question here. He says, now getting down to the questions you ask in your letter to me, first, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Okay, boom. He's saying, hey, is sex good? And by the way, I'm going to put this interlinear really quick with the NLT so I can look at them side by side, okay? So he says, so in your version it says, is it good to abstain from sexual relations? I find it's very interesting that the NLT talks to the don't do in the translation. And now later when this is over, I'm going to dig into the concordance. But it says, in the Message, it says, now to the questions you asked in your letter to me, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? And Paul says this, certainly, but only within a certain context. It's good for, so you were just talking about, right, like, is it good for a man to drag his body into a whorehouse when your body is one with Christ?
Right.
Or to a prostitute, as the other version likes to say. And so he says, remember, two becoming one flesh in the intimacy of that relationship. So he's saying, no, your body's not made for a prostitute. Your body's not made for that kind of sex. So in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2, Paul says, certainly, but only with a certain context. it's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. And here's what he says, and I love this. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life. Now, that's how Paul words it in the Message, the way it's worded, and I'm gonna say how it's worded in the NLT. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. Now, pause, verse 4. The wife gives authority over her body to the husband gives authority over his body to the wife. In the Message, it says, after the strong, balanced, fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder, the marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. This is the difference between right sex with your spouse and banging it out with randoms, throughout your life. And people are like, oh, I can't believe he said that. Oh, he's not, and he can't really be ordained and stuff because he just said banging it out with randoms. Yeah, guess what? I did do Bible college, and guess what? It was boring for 90% of it, but the truth is you're forced to dig into the Word, into Greek and Hebrew, and start to get a handle on this. And what he is saying is, look, in the context of marriage, there is a freedom to things. It's good because when he says marriage is strong enough to contain it, sexual drives are strong, but marriage can remain. You know why he's saying that? Because he's saying within the bonds of marriage, there is a freedom in the bedroom to get your freak on, kids. That you don't have to worry about damage being done when two people are mutually, when you as a husband are saying, my drive is to satisfy my wife in every physical way possible. And your wife is saying, and my drive is to satisfy my husband in every physical way possible. And not to the extent of, I'm going to do something that hurts me or makes me uncomfortable. That's just wrong to think. But when both people, their goal is, I love this person so much, I want to bring them a massive amount of pleasure in every possible way. If you're thinking that for your spouse, you aren't selfish and you're not concerned about you. You're not going, ooh, I want to feel good. What can I get out of this? You don't have to worry about that because your spouse is worried about that with you. So you can give your spouse 100% focus. Now think about the random hookups, right? When we look for a random hookup, and listen, man, I didn't get married a virgin in August, okay? All of us have a past, right? I know. It's hard to believe. All of us have a past, and we bring, like we said at the beginning, we bring baggage in, okay? But here's the reality. I can tell you, any one of us, anybody listening to the show, when you think of a random hookup, you don't see someone attractive and go, ooh, I'd sure love to make sure that they're pleased at the end of the night, regardless of how I feel. That's not.
No, it's 100% a selfish view.
That person looks hot. I wonder if they're good in bed. Let's find out. And whether they are or aren't, even when you're in there, you might be like, it might be hot to please them, but your goal was what? I want pleasure tonight, and that's why I want to be all up on that person. Whereas what Paul is saying here is sex is strong drive. Within the context of marriage, you have the freedom to passionately satisfy one another. And he says marriage is a decision to serve each other when in the bedroom or out. And now that's a big deal because imagine Anthony's like laughing over there. I love it, Anthony. But imagine if we stop for a minute though, because it's funny because of what we've been programmed with TV and movies and the conversations we have. We've been programmed so weirdly. But stop and imagine, what would sex look like in somebody's life if you were with someone who physically just wanted to satisfy your needs completely? Imagine how good you'd feel. And then stop and go, if all I had to do was worry about trying everything I knew how to satisfy them, imagine how good they'd feel. Dude, how many marriages would no longer suffer from discontentment? People that go commit adultery. And here's the weird thing. They go do it because they're afraid to tell their spouse what they want, but they'll go tell some random weirdo what they want.
Yeah, that's...
But that's a bigger problem. They're focused on what they want instead of asking their spouse, what do you want? How can I love you better? How can I physically love you better? How can I get the eros on, right? How can I bring the sexual satisfaction to you? When you get that feeling, how do I bring that sexual healing, right? But nobody wants to just ask their spouse like those questions. And part of that is because we know when we ask the question and they say, I like this, in today's society, when we know most of us didn't marry up virgins, when I say, what makes you feel good? And they tell me, my brain goes, oh, somebody else did that to them. And now it's like, now you got to know, like, oh, how do they know they like that? Oh, because someone else did it. And so we don't even want to ask because we don't want to have to think about that either. So on multiple levels.
Yeah, and I think that's a really profound statement because it does put you in a place when you're having that conversation with somebody. And this could fast forward because like we're talking specifically right now, if somebody's just now tuning in, about, the sexual intimacy in marriage and how that looks, from a biblical perspective, from a human perspective. And I think Matt hit on a really good point here, is that if you're asking the other person, if you're more concerned with their outcome than your own, then it means there's the potential that they've already had that outcome. Well, how do you know that you like that? And here's the thing too. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're like, well, I saw that. The reality is, right, we're served up sex on the daily, right? We're served up sex all over the place, and not in a good way. In my opinion, right? Where sex sells, so that's one of the pieces where people will see that and go, and it could be in the back of their mind that they go, well, I might like that, and we put ourselves in a different position. And one of the keys is we're not truthful with our spouse about how that makes us feel. We're not truthful with ourselves about how that makes us feel, and so, and I think. So it becomes the breakdown in communication. So why do people go and commit adultery? Because they don't have to be honest with the random. They don't have to be truly biblically straightforward, honest, and open. It's that one-time deal, and they're out.
Well, you hit something really good there, Mike. And think about this, okay? So if we're going to the context of sex, and we talk about like going. What would satisfy you, right? If we were to say that to someone, right? So we have to ask the question: what would prevent someone from saying, "Here's what I believe. Here's what I'd like to try," or "Here's what I saw," or "Here's what I read," and I think
I didn't know we were going here, guys.
Well, we're going to go there. So we have to ask the question: though, what would make someone not want to answer that to their spouse? And at the depth of it, it's fear of rejection. Right?
Fear of rejection, fear of judgment.
But so what that brings, though, is this. Then what we're really saying is the person I'm with does not love me unconditionally. The person that I'm with, I'm afraid that they do not. Because if I'm afraid to say to my spouse, I would like to try this with us, what do you think? If we're afraid to say that, what we're really saying is, I don't trust you enough. And as my wife brought up in our devotional as we were writing it, she said, trust starts outside the bedroom so that you can have trust inside the bedroom. And that's a strong word. So when we're afraid to say to our spouse, hey, would you like to try this? And it goes both ways. Even for you, when you want to please your spouse, if you're afraid to say, hey, is there something you'd like to try? Sometimes we're afraid to ask that question because we don't want to get rejected either. And what we're really saying is, I don't feel safe enough to ask you this. And if we say, why don't I feel safe? It's because I'm worried of how you'll respond. And so here's why, when you said sex outside the marriage, I don't have to be honest with that person. Or people go, I can just do whatever I want, right? Like if I want to put it somewhere else, I'll just go for it. And they say no. There's no harm, no foul, right? Like, but that's the mentality. And I think it's so, it sounds bad and whatever, but I think it's honest enough that we have to share it, because outside of, the reason we have so much fear of rejection is two things. One, in the marriage relationship, we haven't put God at the center of our sex life, and that's a good part for us to transition into. But have you stopped? Have you prayed over your sex life? Have you invited God into your bedroom? Now that's a question.
That's a strong question,
and it's also a question I don't hear getting asked at church. Do you pray over your sex life?
Dude, there is no pastor anywhere that has ever asked that question.
Well, you're talking
until
to
now.
One that is ordained.
I just said until now,
and that is this. Have you prayed? And Mike and it like Dara, my wife and I, we talked about this. It's like I pray over our sex. I pray over our sex life. Like God's in the bedroom, And that's as deep in the bedroom detail as I'll go with anyone else. But I share that because part of why we don't have the freedom in the bedroom, I think, is because we are inviting God, the one who created this gift, into that. We're not asking, God, would you please bless the intimacy part of our marriage? And it's, and I'm gonna tell you right now, the first time that I asked God that, I felt weird. I'm like, wait, is this dirty? Like, should I not be? And I'm like, no, you gave me this wife, and you gave us to each other, and we're supposed to seek to please each other. So God, would you help me know how to respond to her physically? Help me know how to bring that. Help me know how to, to bring it.
Well, but there's other reasons to bring God. I mean, here's another twist. When I think people pray over their sex lives, there's one time that people do invite God into the bedroom to pray over their sex lives, when they're praying for a child, for example.
Yes.
When they're praying for a little boy or a little girl. And the thing is, sexual intercourse itself is a gift from God. And it's put there for specific purposes, certainly one of them being procreation. And because it comes on so early in the Bible, that's one of those pieces where that's probably the most normal it feels to people to invite God into the bedroom, because we're saying, please get my wife pregnant. Please provide us with twins. Please, and we're having that conversation with God. And he does bless procreation. He does bless the union. You brought it up in Genesis 2, where he's talking about Adam and Eve, and they become one flesh, right? That is another one of the basic purposes to serve God, is the procreation, the union of people. I've got a list here.
That's only one.
I'm saying procreation is one. Yeah. The union of man and woman is a second one. Physical gratification and pleasure, you talked about it, 1 Corinthians 7.
That's my favorite part of it.
That's the personal gratification. Thanks for tuning in tonight, folks. We appreciate you. Physical gratification and pleasure. And then here's another one that I had noted, and I pulled this out of a blog. I should have noted the blog.
I love Anthony's comment, by the way, on the bottom. You should share that. Get the shame out of the game.
So, come on, Anthony. Anthony on YouTube, he says, yes, get the shame out of the game.
I love it.
His logo is fire. I love Anthony. Anthony works with me. So
Anthony, you rock. Thank you for being on, bro.
Absolutely.
So, hey, go to the sexual gratification part again. Pick up where you left off there.
Well, I was saying sexual gratification is one, and then the last one that they note, and I have to read this word for word. So this specific piece is not my original thought, but it says, for biblical instruction through our individual sexual natures and through sexual intercourse and marriage, especially in our own capacity to become one flesh, God teaches us about Christ's love for his church. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective. So, and one of the places where they specifically reference is in Ephesians 5. So I'll jump to that.
Come on,
are you rolling? Okay. So Ephesians 5, it says, and further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For a husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is head of the church. He is the Savior of his body, the church. As the church submits to Christ, so you wives should submit to your husbands in everything. And then he speaks to husbands as well. We're not just talking to wives. He says, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by cleansing God's word. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. So I thought that was, one, on point in Scripture. And when I was going through and I was saying, well, what are the pieces that God gave us for sexual intimacy and intercourse specifically? Because as I'm going through those, I thought it was an interesting perspective, because that was not something that occurred, like it is now that I read the Scripture.
Yeah.
Right? But prior to that, when it just said that the highlight was that it was given to us for instruction, I was like, What are we teaching?
It's like, did you ever lose your virginity? Did you get instructions or an instruction manual? Because I don't know anyone who did.
It's written in some other language.
This is why I'm glad that my children don't watch this, because I'm very proud. So I love my kids very much. They're fantastic, and and this isn't a bad thing to share. So my son Liam, I had asked him when he started, his now wife, when they started dating, I was like, dude, because she came and stayed with us for a little while, and I'm like, yeah, she can stay at separate beds, you know the deal, right?
Yep.
And your room is the loft, is just wide open, so don't think you could be sneaky, right? Because you know, I'm the inventor of the sneakiness. I will bust you out. But he said something to me that, dude, it meant so much to my heart. Because he said, Dad, you know, something you said a long time ago stuck with me, which is, you know, if you're hooking up with somebody, and they're not your wife, then that means you're hooking up with somebody who could be somebody else's wife, and that's not cool. That's not cool to take that away from them. And I'm like, oh wow, like. That was a strong. And by the way, when he heard that, when I was a youth leader, he couldn't have been more than 6, and that stuck with him all the way to 19. And so when he married his wife, that was their first encounter. And here's what makes this great: is my oldest son said, "Hey, did you talk to him or give him any pointers?" He asked me this on my son's wedding night, and I go, "No, he needs to awkwardly stumble through this like everyone else,
like everybody
you
else."
Get instructions, but you read something out of Ephesians, and you know what you didn't do, man. No, this isn't a bad thing. You didn't finish it, and so I want to. In Ephesians,
please
5,
by all means.
I want to go back to what you said because
should I do like the movie voice now? Picking up from Ephesians 5. What are you? Are you making? You're singing?
No, I didn't mean to play that song. Oh, those Corey Asbury's Canyon started playing. I love that song. Okay, so Ephesians 5.
And now from Ephesians 5:27, Matt Koenig pits up.
It's a great song by Corey Asbury. He's also the worship pastor of Mount Church, man. He's a beautiful artist. Ephesians 5, chapter 29 picks this up, Mike, though. So skip down about 4 verses from where you left off, 5 verses.
Yep.
And it says, no one abuses his own body, does he? He feeds and pampers it. Now that's how Christ treats us. Because this whole section of Ephesians is about relationships, right?
Absolutely.
And it says that's how Christ treats us, the church, since we are part of his body. And then he goes on to quote Genesis again. And he said in this letter to Ephesus, and this is why a man leaves his father and mother and cherishes his wife. No longer two, they become one flesh. And I love this part. It's beautiful. He said, this is a huge mystery, and I don't pretend to understand it all. What is clearest to me is the way Christ treats the church. And this provides a picture of how each husband is to treat his wife, loving himself in her, and how each wife is to honor her husband. So at the end of Ephesians, what we're seeing Paul say is, remember, how to treat the other person, which ultimately at the core means put them before yourself. What up, Anthony? So it's putting others before yourself, So even in the context of the marriage bed, put others before yourself. That's the message, right? And that's the difference between a healthy sexual relationship with your wife or your husband and an unhealthy sexual relationship with a random that you're banging. Because in an unhealthy relationship, it's me first. In a healthy one, it's you first. Wife first if you're the husband. Always. Wife first, wife first, wife first. And you have to trust that she also wants to put you first, you first, you first. It isn't a give and take. And that's one thing that drives me nuts when people talk about marriage. Look, marriage is give and take, give and take. No, it's not. Marriage is give and then give some more.
Give and give.
And if both people are doing give and give, there's never a need to take. Oh, but also as a matter of fact, speaking of take, you're not supposed to take away sex either. Here's another reason. Let's talk about some of the damage sex does in a marriage. Okay, one of the biggest damaging things is when people disagree have a disagreement, they abstain from sex.
Oh, yes. Abstaining.
On. Right? How many dudes come to work and it's oh, bro, this is going to probably offend a lot of Christians who tune into this. Bro, I haven't gotten laid in 4 weeks. My wife's pissed at me. How many Christians or non-Christians rattle that crap off? And it's when we use sex as a weapon when we're angry. We take it away. And in 1 Corinthians, and this is one thing I wanted to really, really get up on, is 1 Corinthians 7, in the context of verses 2 through 6, so this is probably around verse 4, verse 3. It says marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out. And then it says this: abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it. But here's the kicker: and if it's for the purpose of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. And then he really nails it down as to why you're not supposed to take a break from sex. So Christians watching this video, husbands and wives watching this video, here's why you're not supposed to stop having sex with your spouse. Are you ready for it, Mike?
I'm ready for it, Matt.
Because after that time that you both agreed not to, which doesn't mean you going, I'm not sleeping with you because I'm mad. He says this, but only for times such as these, prayer and fasting. He says, then come back together. Satan has an ingenious way of tempting us when we least expect it. I am not, understand, commanding these periods of abstinence. I'm providing my best counsel should you choose them. Now, that's how the Message words it. I'm going to read the way yours words it. Okay?
So I'm just going to say while you're looking it up to read it, you can this to me, this is what it speaks to me. And this is like, you can tell your wife, hey, you can't, we're supposed to come back together. Not today, Satan. Right? Is that how that goes?
Pretty much. Pretty much. And in the NLT, so for people that go, I
mean, she has to be a
participant. It's heretical because it's a paraphrase. The NLT says this: do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Afterward, you should come together again so Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, one would say, what do you mean tempt you if I'm not having sex? You know what he means? Porn. Banging someone else. That's what he means by tempt you. When you're holding sex back from your spouse, like, we're drawn to one another. That is part of the gift of God. It is a gift we're supposed to give each other. And when you and your spouse, when you're not sleeping together, when you're not physically intimate, and granted, there's an exception to every rule. Well, what about if my spouse is paralyzed? What about this? Like, I can't do that. Listen, exception to every rule. But in the normative, right, the regular thing, Paul in this letter to the Corinthians is saying, if you are married, do not deprive your spouse of sex, because that's a hunger you both have. And even you as the depriver, and I'll say, like, well, guys don't tend to be the one. Like, I don't know many dudes that are like, I'm so mad I told my wife I'm not sleeping with her. Dudes are just horn dogs, man. I mean, I feel like even in Genesis, when we see, like, Adam's like, wow. You notice he didn't say Eve was like, wow, I want to hook up with him. It was like Adam's like, wow. So I think we see from the beginning of the story, we're pretty driven that way. But setting all jokes aside, the reality is that Paul is saying, as he's writing to the Corinthians, who, by the way, he's writing this letter because he was with them, and they weren't a bunch of horn dogs, and then they became a bunch of horn dogs again. And he's trying to say, look, you guys got to stop having this rampant sex. Like, this is something designed for marriage. But it's important to recognize when we step away from our spouse, when we intentionally abstain. And Paul's saying in 1 Corinthians here, when you intentionally decide you're going to withhold sex from your spouse, the devil is going to use that as an opportunity to come in and
place the wedge.
And show temptation around every corner. That old friend you haven't talked to in 10 years is going to resurface. Oh, Facebook's going to suggest that girl is a friend or that guy is a friend. All of a sudden, that trailer is going to come on for that movie, that's got, like, everybody is in a low-cut corset. All of a sudden, you're going to remember that porn site you used to visit that you stopped visiting, but now you haven't had sex in a month and you're horny, and now you're like, well, maybe I'll just watch it and that'll cool my jets for a while. No. We're not supposed to withhold
pulls you apart
sex.
further.
No, yeah. And here's the deal, too. It's like, in withholding sex, you're intentionally going, I'm withholding serving you sexually. I'm withholding giving you all of me. So if I were to say to my wife, look, I'm just not feeling it. I'm frustrated. I don't want to make love. What I'm saying is, I don't want to give you all of me because I'm upset about something. And so what does that force your spouse to do in return? Well, then you don't get all of me back. And now we're just creating this, like you said, a wedge that biblically is just an unhealthy thing to do. It's not good. Sex is a gift that is supposed to be celebrated within marriage. And we only have like 9 minutes left on the show, so I'm going to throw a question out to you, though, Mike. Because let's talk about in the Christian church. Yeah, this is one to make everybody go, oh my gosh, the way they ended that last show, I got to tune into the next one. what are the limits in the bedroom though for Christian couples? Are there like what if somebody's got a little freak-a-leak fetish, like a little, I like to get a little weird with my spouse? Is that okay? Or do you think Christians are meant to like tab A, slot B, missionary style, rock it out? That's the discomfort I was looking for. Yes, that's the discomfort I was looking for from my partner and friend in the show.
It's not even that amount of discomfort. I mean, it is. It's absolutely that amount of discomfort because that's not my jam. But I think what really made me laugh was tab A, slot B.
Well, that's how church describes it, right? Tab A fits into slot B, and that's where the whole argument over the other stuff that I just made that video about the other day comes from. You know, like, but in the Christian context, I've heard many places say that sex is designed for procreation or whatever, and anything short of anything outside of like missionary grunting it out is inappropriate. What do you say? I'm curious.
I think this is just my opinion. You absolutely know this is not where I intended to go with
I know, that's why I wanted to bring it there before we close. What's up, Neil? Thanks for jumping on our Clubhouse, bro.
I love Neil, man. I'm glad you came by here tonight. You know, where the Bible talks about it, like, for example, Song of Songs, right? It talks about sexual intimacy and two lovers and their expression of physical love, right? So let me kiss on kiss of the mouth for your love. Like,
dude, he's talking about our boobies being like mountains.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are... You have to be careful about how you frame that, because I think there are certain things that are off limits, especially if they're off limits to the other person. If you're really focused on and worried about, I have to be able to satisfy this other individual. If you're focused on them and not yourself, I think that is first and foremost the key. Because the reality is everybody has kinky thoughts. Right? You do, I do, the people listen to the show.
I love how you said to lump me in with you, so you couldn't just say I do. You're like, right, we both do, right? Right?
Everybody does. Listen, it's honest, everybody does, folks. If you're tuning in, everyone does. All right? And so the thing is, I think where the limits come into play is, one, what is the limit of you pleasing the other person? And at what point, regardless of what it is, if it's tab A, slot B, you know, button C, whatever, I don't even know what the next item would be. But so Neil says, no, stop saying that about sex. I'm banning you for that. Yeah, we're shadow banned. Thanks, Neil.
I love it. Neil's so great.
So I think at the forefront, there are a lot of places that get to sexy time in the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. That they lead to that. I sent, you know, ironically, it's funny. I sent you there was a guy on TikTok the other day talking about the story of the Bible, and he framed it about, he's like, and this guy went walking the earth, and there were these people, and they were fighting, and it was a battle, and there was a love story, and you remember the TikTok that I sent you, or the video I sent you? Mm-hmm. And it's so funny because all the stuff in there, if you listen to it, he's talking about, he's like, and it's this book, but you know, and there was wars and kings and sex and all this other stuff, and he brings up all of these things that are in it, and like we all know he's referring to the Bible, right? As a Christian, you know he's referring to a Bible, but it sounds as if it's this really hot action film that you're like, oh my gosh, that book would make a great movie, right? And when it's presented in what is really in the Bible, rather than with some veiled view of it. So that's my final. It took me 4 minutes to say the same thing. We got 6 minutes left, but it took me 4 minutes.
That's okay.
I think that's the biggest thing, is if you're focused on where the other person's headed, or where you're taking the other person to in that sexual relationship, that is going to help outline and define the boundaries. How about, what's your opinion on that? You're asking the question. I don't want to answer a question with a question.
I think that there are no limits, as long as I think that the limits are. I think you said it very well at the beginning, that that there are no limits in the efforts of pleasing one another within the confines of the marriage bed. And what I mean by that is this: there are unhealthy things, right? There are here's a good example. Listen, I'm gonna get 50 Shades with people for a minute and make them uncomfortable, and our show may go 5 minutes over because of it. But for example, if both people are in agreement of what you do in the bedroom, there is a freedom. However, there are some things that are unhealthy. And so, for example, let's take 50 Shades of Grey. Dude, there's literally a group of children called Graybies. That's what they're referred to jokingly.
Oh
because
my
when
gosh.
50 Shades of Grey came out 9 months later, there was a
Oh my gosh.
You can look it up. The boom in births skyrocketed 9 months after this book came out. So they're referred to as Graybies. But if you know about this movie, right, it's about like submission, domination, right, and physically. Not a good movie, by the way. It's a crap movie. But not even just because of the context. It's just I think it's a crummy movie. And I watched it back, when I was walking a different path for a minute. But here's why I say this. Because when you look at things like being hit, being hurt, something like that, those aren't healthy things. You wouldn't do them outside of the context of the marriage bed, so why would you do it in it? So I would challenge people, if that's one of your things, like you get revved up when somebody slaps you in the face, I would say there might be a deeper psychological hurt there, like because I've heard a lot of people when I've talked about things like this and had these dialogues. That's funny, Neil.
Neil says, "Dude, I was gray before it was popular."
Yeah, well, thank you, Christian Grey. But here's the thing, though. I bring this up because a lot of people like to do those type of things because they've been hurt in that way in the past, and in the context of the bedroom, they feel like they have control over it, right? So I've been beaten and sexually abused in the past by a spouse, family member, whatever. Now that I'm with my new spouse, I want them to slap me while they're sleeping with me and leave marks and bruises. But because I'm telling them to, I'm in control. So I think that there is safety to get a little freaky, do whatever you want in your marriage bed. But be careful that what you're doing isn't you trying to take control because you're trying to overcome a hurt from the past by being in control of it. That might be something to pray on, seek some counseling even, because you don't want to bring the hurts from your past and introduce those hurts to the person you love. Under
Absolutely.
the guise of what society has told you is okay. Now that being said,
That's it.
I'm gonna. Oh, look! I did it within the context of the minutes. I've heard people say, right, anything other than missionary. Look, if you and your spouse, my old church, somebody asked this question, so now it's not me bringing it up. My old church, they said, look, we're gonna let kids and teens go to the teen ministry, but you're gonna text your questions and we're gonna answer them. And it was the pastor and his wife in our 4,000 member multi-campus church. And one of the people asked the question: oral sex, anal sex, kinks, what's off limits? And his response was, the Bible doesn't tell you, it doesn't say you and your spouse can't do those things as long as it's pleasing to your spouse and you, and that's your business. But he cautioned against the same things. Don't bring things in that were damaging to you under the guise of having control of that thing and thinking you're not redeeming that thing by doing it. It's not bringing redemption for that thing. Seth said, not encouraging one outcome or another, but why should Solomon be encouraged to curb his total concubine count versus encouraged to eliminate concubines? Seth, I wish I had an answer for that. I get frustrated when I'm in small group and people refer to them as all of Solomon's wives, and I'm like, if you read the Bible, they were all of his side chicks. As a matter of fact, they got so mad in my old small group because I used the word side pieces. I said those were all side pieces. Those weren't the people he loved. Those were all the women he was banging, and it wasn't appropriate. So Seth, I don't understand it either, bro. I would think he should have been encouraged to get to eliminate them. That being said, during that period of time, and I'm going to bring up something sort of gross but accurate biblically, there was something in Scripture. There is literally Scripture, and you'll have to Google it because I can't tell you the verses. I know the destination, but I don't know the street signs for this one. But there is a scriptural verse that says if you rape a woman, you are to take her as your wife. And now, if we look at that in context today in America, it's no woman that wants to be raped would like you to be her husband forever. That is disgusting.
Nope.
And truth, it was disgusting then. But now let me tell you, when some people will take that verse and they'll say, this is why the Bible's not an accurate book to ever look at and why we shouldn't be using it as a guide for sex. Because it says that. Now let me tell you why that is wrong and where my shift changed and why that verse is so valuable. Because in that time, women, these marauders, they're traveling across country, and they're using women and throwing them away like garbage, right? They're raping them, and once that woman's defiled, no one will take her as a husband. So that command and that scripture saying this, here's some fact: if you're that guy, you have an obligation to provide for her for the rest of her life. You cannot throw her away like garbage. Contrary to popular belief, that was a very progressive viewpoint back then. Now we look at it and go, actually, you should just not violate someone, you idiot, right?
Right.
And Robin says, well, you can get divorced, and you can, but you shouldn't start it in the first place if it's not the right person, right? Like, here's the thing, and to be fair, I've been divorced, so I don't think we always get it right on the first try, but I think how you go into marriage will determine, in most cases, I say exception to every rule, because you may go into it with all the right, and you're giving and you're loving and you're putting them first, and they may be a taker and a taker. Thank you, Neil. They may be a taker and a taker, and they may not go into the marriage with the right idea. Okay, but
Neil called it Deuteronomy 22, 28, and 29.
Neil's the man. So going to what Robin 5 says, you can, and even in looking through it, when it's like, well, why did Moses give a writ of divorce? And when Jesus was asked about it, he said, because you guys are, basically he said, because you don't do it right. He gave you a kind way to get out so that you wouldn't basically be condemning someone as an adulteress forever, because you wouldn't actually fully commit your life to your spouse. But if we look at it in the biblical context, like when Dara and I went into our marriage, we put all of it on the table before getting married. All of our questions, Neil's Google is strong. All of our questions, all of our concerns relationally, all of our damage, like we shared it. And most people don't want to do that. They don't want to share their damage.
Well, that goes back to that goes back to earlier in the show when we were talking about like that. It's hard to be completely transparent and truthful. Like I mean, I shouldn't say it's hard to be, but people are often unwilling to be completely transparent and truthful, not just of the sexual nature. Right? Relationships, past relationships, friendships, business. There's so many
pictures from up angles. Like people are taking pictures from angles to not show their whole self on dating apps, right? Like they misrepresent themselves. They're trying to sell a story. Relationally, dude, we lead into relationships with so much fakeness. And the hopes that we can get a permanent relationship, and then we wonder why it doesn't work. And people go into marriage that way. They start dating on a fake things. A picture.
They start on a dating app. They start looking at the photo. They start looking, and you're able to put the best version of yourself, right? Like I've got this perfectly crafted biography of why I love hiking and this and that, and then they're like, "Hey, let's go on a hike," and it's like, "No, I hate hiking." Well, but no.
Oh, Robin, I'm so sorry. And yes, I would think
so. Can I jump into this?
Please.
So Robin says, and for people that are listening, I need to share with like Clubhouse, and if we're listening to the podcast later.
Yeah.
Robin says, mine walked out on me after 43 years. Okay, so can I get into another relationship?
Well, why couldn't you? Like, here's the thing. I know I've heard stories of marriages being redeemed, right? Where somebody walks out and their spouse loves them and says, I'm not giving up on them, and I'm leaving an open door, and I'm not going to go. I think the honest answer is you got to pray. You got to ask God, is this something that's coming back? There are very clear things in the Bible, right? If they stepped out on you, they went and slept with somebody else, bye. If they're abusive, right, things like that,
sure.
It seems it's pretty cut and dry and clear. If you grew apart and you're just like, we just we woke up one day and we're just different people and we're done. I mean, divorce is possible and it is a thing, but sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what was that the right decision to make? But sometimes you grew apart because you were never one in the first place. Two never really became one. And I think we have to allow grace for that in real life. I don't think people should enter into marriage with the lightheartedness of, if it doesn't work out, we could just get a divorce.
Not at all.
I don't think
I agree with you on that.
I don't think most people walk into marriage that way, if I'm being honest. I think they've got the butterflies and the love or man, we have great sex and we sure do get along well, whatever it may be. But people walk in with that mindset, and I don't think they walk in going, if it doesn't work, we'll get a divorce, because divorces are expensive. They take forever. You got debt. Like, nobody wants to go through that. But I think the reality is most people also don't go into marriage wholly transparent, like you said. And here's a challenge I want to... Well, Neil, do what makes you happy as long as it's not hurting others, but life's about making yourself happy. No, I don't think that's true. Neil, I'm going to push back on it, and maybe that's a good topic for another show, Mike. Maybe we should write that down. But I am going to push back on this. Everything we read scripturally about relationships says make your wholehearted focus, loving and serving the other person. So basically, so much so that how could they not want to respond in kind? And I think when you marry the right person, you don't have to worry about trying to make yourself happy anymore. But you will, as a result, Neil, you will be happy because you're with your companion. And I would wholeheartedly agree with you. We do live in an age of not just marital lust, but of lust. Right? So, anyways, listen. Love you guys. I think there's there's more conversation that could be had regarding marriage and relationships on this. But I think one thing that is so important is this. And this was the last thing I actually wanted to close up with, Mike, is that I want to challenge and encourage people. If you're dating, if you're engaged, okay, if you're with somebody and you think this could be my person forever.
My person. I love when you say that.
There's a song called My Person that Dara played for me. Like, it just gets me a little weepy. I love it. If you think the person you're with, if you go, you know what, there might be a chance with this person. Pray, right? Go to God. Hey, God, is this my person? But I want to challenge you to take a risk. Don't wait till you're married to step out in faith and tell them about your hurts and your damage. Like, do the scary thing and bring it up now. Just say, hey, going into this relationship, intimacy is something that's going to be important. Like, you need to be able to say, to me, sex is super important. Like, I don't want to go, like, after 2 days of not having it, I'm going to be, like, really feeling, like, wondering if you don't love me anymore. Like, whatever your thoughts are, share those. If you've been molested, if you've had... been abused, if feel like you've had some sexual damage, you're like, I don't want to tell that to this person. They don't need to know about that because I'm never going to deal with that again. You're going to deal with it every time you're in the bedroom, and they're going to make the mistake of saying something that's going to bring it back up to you, and then you're going to be hurt and embarrassed, and you're not going to want to feel bad. Like, there are all these things that will come up when you're married. It's better to share them up front, because guess what? If you're with them and they're not your person, they're going to respond wrong now. And better to be done before you start than to go into a marriage, have children, and 10 years later be like, oh, I didn't know that you, when you found out about what happened in my childhood, were going to
shut down
me now.
And
shut down or whatever. So make sure, two things. Share your damage and have the conversation. Download the couples devotional. Mike shared it on the screen again for those listening on Clubhouse. You can go to 633, the number 633.today/couples devo. Download this couples devotional that my wife and I wrote. I would love not only for you to go through it, but our email address is in the end of it. Send us feedback, pushback, whatever. But please open up to your spouse. Tell them your loves, your dreams, and your hurts. So
your hurts, your desires.
Together into it.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not a match in the bedroom, truthfully, one or two things are going to happen. Your marriage won't last, or you're going to last in an unhappy marriage. The bedroom is this. It is. God is at the center of your whole relationship, and your intimacy with one another is literally second to that in a marriage relationship. It's that important. And if you're not on the same page, it's a recipe for ruin. So please bring it all up to the person that you think might be your person. If you're a married couple right now, and your sex life isn't like on fire like this podcast is, if you don't if you don't feel like your sex life is one that you just literally celebrate with joy and abundance in a ridiculous way, if you're not pining for your spouse all day long and being like, I cannot wait to get you naked, if you don't feel that kind of excitement toward your spouse, please download that devotional. And I want to challenge you, talk to your spouse about how to ask them, hey, Why is it you're not crazily trying to jump all over me all day and talk about why your sexual life isn't as passionate as Song of Songs?
And with that, we ran over time, guys. Thanks. You, Matt. Thank you. No, Matt, seriously, thank you. I always learn so much. I have a great friendship with Matt, as hopefully you guys can tell. And I learned so much. And I sit and that's why I fall into, a lot of times I'm doing all the talking. But on nights like this, and especially once you ask certain questions, I want to listen because I want to learn and grow. So it's great, man.
Dude, I love you,
appreciate
man.
it.
And listen, I probably wouldn't have as much to say about this if we hadn't literally just written an 8-week devotional and small.
I think that's awesome.
Which, by the way, we will be doing a version of that live and online for couples to tune into. So that's going to be coming up here in March. We're not going to. We're going to do the small group in our home separately, but we're going to do an purely online streaming version for people to join us, ask questions, type in chats, things like that. So I'll share more about that on my social. If you're not following me on Instagram, then you should, because that's where typically everything gets announced. And Mike, I'll send it to you. But we will be sharing this for people to join into. So Robin, Neil, Seth, Bridge Services. What's Bridge's real name? First name?
Bridge Services is John.
John.
I know John.
Bro. But
Neil,
thank you, everyone,
Jim over on Clubhouse. We had, I think, half a dozen people cruise through on Clubhouse. Tina was over there. So, yeah, everybody who's taking the time to tune in, do me a favor. Do me a favor at this point, please. If you've gained something out of this episode, or you think you know somebody that could gain something out of a future episode, share that with them. We share this on all of our socials, on all of our platforms. We go out, cut a podcast for it later. You can go look up the podcast on just about any Audible, everywhere. Amazon, iHeart. Go to just Google Friday Night Fire, and it shows up. And so much for my alias.
Neil said, I always come in late. Neil, we're glad that you're here. Hey, you know what would have been great, dude? We should have played Kings of Leon, Sex on Fire to close it out, because it's Friday night.
But I don't have that queued up, so you know what I'm going to do to take us out?
Copyright.
Guys, have a great evening. God bless you all. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you back here next Friday night for more Friday Night Fire.